Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for How to Break the Top 5 Bad Business Habits for Lawyers as part of the LTRC Industry Insight Series. Our speaker today is Erica Birstler. Erica Birstler is the Vice President at CosmoLex, developers of the only fully integrated legal practice management, billing, and trust accounting system specifically designed for solo and small law firms. Erica's degree is in business administration, and she has nearly a decade of experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small to mid-sized law firms. Erica is passionate about helping legal professionals improve the way their law firms run, and she has given numerous presentations across North America on legal technologies such as law practice technology management, cloud computing, and legal billing and trust accounting compliance to help spread her knowledge. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
For joining today on this topic. So what we'll be following in terms of agenda is, so we'll first talk about what defines a bad habit, and then we'll focus on 5 specifically that tend to be kind of common habits among law firms that may be worth breaking. You know, they might be causing other challenges in your firm that you may not have thought of, and by making some changes or adjustments, it might overall make your business a lot easier to run. And then throughout, we'll be talking about technology. We'll touch upon how technology can help to create improved processes and efficiency in your firm, which very often relates back to these various habits. So the first thing is defining habits. Now, I think it's pretty straightforward as to what a habit is. We're all familiar with the term, but the actual definition is something where it's a tendency or a practice that's hard to give up. You do it with a regular routine basis. It's something that's kind of ingrained. It's actually considered a pattern that the brain creates over time. So it's something that is mentally difficult to break. If something's easy to quit, it's not a habit. It's the ones that are a little bit more difficult, the ones that become part of our day-to-day lives that seem a little bit harder to break that pattern. And humans in general, of course, are creatures of habit, but especially in the legal community, it's grounded in a very traditional ways of doing things and a little bit more adversity to change than the general public. And I think that many of you I've come across when I speak with law firms, been working in the same firm or at least in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years. And those habits build over time. It's not something that happens overnight. And of course, the longer those habits are in place, the harder they are to break. Now, not all habits are bad. You know, there are good habits, but there are some that can directly affect your business by resulting in a few things we mentioned: inefficiencies, lack of productivity, and can even directly affect your overall profits and success of your firm. Those are the ones that we want to concentrate on and see, well, is there even an issue here? And is that something that I should even be aware of? So the first step is identifying what these habits are. So as we go through these items today, keep in mind you don't want to tackle too many things at once. Change can be daunting. Some may be small incremental changes, some may be a little bit more drastic depending on how your firm is currently set up. But the most important thing is to kind of take away why some of these habits can be detrimental to your firm and why breaking them could be beneficial to your firm. And then you could figure out how you want to prioritize them. Some of them do you want to take on, some of them you don't. And if you can visualize the long-term benefit, that's very important. I think many people think of short-term. If I stop this right now, what's going to benefit me short-term? You need to also think long-term, because if you're talking about ROI or productivity and seeing the results of that, it might not happen in a day. So you need to think more from a long-term perspective. All right, so let's get into our 5 items today. The first one we're going to talk about is inefficient workflows. And workflows can be understood in many different ways. It could relate to all the different steps in the completion of a specific task. It could be how various areas or departments work together, like the workflow between those functions, physical functions or physical people. It can depend. And in an ideal world, your firm, as well as any other business, would work like a perfectly well-oiled machine. Everything's seamless and smooth and no bumps in the road, but that, of course, is not realistic. There's always going to be bumps, but there are ways to identify those and see if there's something that can be done differently to get closer and closer to that ideal picture of that well-oiled machine. So when we talk about inefficient workflows, why is that something to keep an eye on? Why is that a habit worth breaking? And what's interesting is I feel that, unfortunately, when we talk about efficiency, that is highly overlooked in law firms, especially. Some situations are, obviously, if you're billing hourly, you might think saving time's not a priority because you're billing for all the work that you're doing. But if you are thinking about, you need to think in a smart way about the allocation of your resources. Who's doing that work? You might have a paralegal, for instance, who's spending 3 days generating bills when he or she could be better used to assist you in drafting a document or a brief or working a little bit more hands-on with the case on more billable type of work. So I never think that I need to tell law firms time is money. I think very often it's thought about, well, I can bill for my time, but also think about the time that you may essentially be wasting that is not always billable. And that takes us to our next point. Most administrative work is non-billable. I think that the vast majority of inefficiencies in really any business, but also law firms, is the administrative work. That could be client intake, that could be billing, that could be organization, that could be filing, that could be just the chaos that ensues when things are not done the right way and things just end up taking longer. That kind of builds on that disorganization point. That's all unbillable work or non-billable work very often. So you're not charging hourly based on the time it takes you to find a file in your office. You know, that's something that's eating away from the valuable resources in your firm. And also, don't forget about flat rate cases. I think very often, if you're not charging hourly, it's thought of, I don't need to really keep track of my time. But if you think about it, let's say your fee is $5,000 and you're putting in $10,000 worth of time based on your average rate. Either you're highly inefficient in the way you're completing your tasks for your clients, or your rate needs to be adjusted. But if you're not tracking that time, you don't know where these inefficiencies lie or where these issues lie. You may be cutting yourself short quite a bit on those flat rates. So how do we break this particular habit? Well, there's a few points that I'd like to mention here. Some of them, as I said, will kind of weave in technology, because I do think whenever you talk about efficiency, technology plays a pretty important role. But one of the things is to track the time that's being spent no matter what. Now there's 3 specific examples. So here I say including non-billable. I'm referring to that non-billable administrative work. That could be how long it takes for somebody to make photocopies, printing, even just the day-to-day administrative tasks. How much time are they putting towards that? I know a lot of firms that will set up an actual administrative matter in whatever billing software they have and track the hours, that non-billable work that might not be for a specific client. It's just kind of in general, so they can keep an eye on how much time that's taking up. Also non-billable for fixed and contingency, which I mentioned. So even though you're not charging for your time, you still want to go ahead and track those. And hourly items that you might not be charging for. Anything that is a no charge or non-billable, you should still track it from a productivity perspective, because there's so many hours in a week. That pie is made up of billable work and non-billable work, and you want to account for all of it so that you can really bring to light all of these inefficiencies. Another approach I like is tracking utilization and because you're not choosing to charge them for that work, or it could be unintentional. Maybe a bad time entry workflow. You know, you're not getting your time recorded appropriately, or there's inaccuracies because of that. Maybe there's unintentionally fee that's not making it to the invoice. That's something to keep in mind as well. So that's the utilization part. Are we actually billing for everything we intend to bill for? Realization is how much of that time that we're spending is actually getting collected. So that comes down to you do all this work, let's say you do bill for it, are you actually earning the money on that? Are you getting paid? And then, of course, that goes into your collection workflows. Are those efficient? Are you able to recoup that money once those bills are out and past due? As I mentioned, technology plays a really strong role, anything related to efficiency. So any type of bulk or batch functions you could do, like invoice generation, invoice emails, collection reminders, even batch payments, like if you receive, if you have 10 invoices that you're paying with one debit from Trust, or if a client gives you a check and you have to apply it to different matters, all of those, instead of doing one at a time, printing checks in a batch, instead of printing one at a time, printing 30 at once. Those are all ways to cut corners in a way that you end up with the same end result, but it's saving you a lot of time, and your client service is not affected by it. They're not noticing anything different, but on the back end, you're saving a lot of time. Our second habit, which actually relates a lot to our first one, standardization, or the lack of. And you probably have all heard the phrase, no need to reinvent the wheel. That's exactly what standardization is talking about. If you are reinventing the wheel every time that you're doing a certain task, that means you do not have anything standardized. If you have a foundation, a base to work from, why not start from there? That's what standardization is building that foundation that's the same kind of across the board with certain tasks, and then tweaking it after that so that 80% of the work's already done. You're not redoing that each and every time. You're just making those small adjustments. And in regards to standardization, it's usually with very repetitive or routine tasks or things that are at least somewhat similar. If you have certain tasks that are completely unique, obviously you can't standardize. But we talk about, why is standardization important? Okay, why is the lack of it a habit worth breaking? Valuable time, and this goes right back to that time is money. I can't stress enough that efficiency is just as important as the amount of staff and resources you have to work on your cases. Risk missing items. This is an even bigger part, because the whole idea of standardization is to create some sort of structure or have a process in place. If you don't have that, then certain tasks, even deadlines, can easily be missed. And some of those are critical. Some of those hold really heavy consequences. And a few examples I can think of is, from a standardization, you have like maybe a checklist, like if you have a task management tool or something that has a workflow built in, where or if you're using a template for certain documents, or for invoicing, it's all meant to save you time and reduce the risk of errors. And what most people don't think of is what we all struggle with is delegating of tasks. There's a lot of lawyers that I know of that are doing things that they should not be doing. Just because you should be doing a particular task. And often the reason why we don't delegate is because we're thinking, oh, it's too complicated, I have to train this person, I don't have the time. Well, if you work to standardize your tasks and document those, it would make it tremendously easy to track that is 80% forms from online for certain documents. There's a lot of legal sites that can provide you with the standardized template for a lot of this information. A lot of bar associations actually provide templates for things like retainer agreements. If you don't know kind of where to start, you start with that template and you build from there. Develop those detailed internal processes. So this goes, you may have a standardization in place, but if somebody doesn't know how to use it, then that's not really helpful for them. So think about, and I've had this in the many roles I've had in the past, is if you are not here tomorrow and you're completely unreachable, how would somebody be able to complete your tasks? And that's what I always think about with every task I do. If for some reason things happen, I'm not here tomorrow, would somebody be able to complete this particular task? Do I have it documented so that somebody could follow it? And it's an approach to documentation that not everybody sees, but I see personally a lot of value in it, and I think it makes it a lot easier and takes a lot of the pressure off of, only one person knows how to do that, and you need to go to that one person. Checklists. I think that this is one area I feel is still, and I'm a pen and paper girl, so I get it. A lot of us keep our lists, our to-do lists, our checklists on pen and paper. But again, twofold. One, nobody else is seeing that piece of paper. That is yours and it's on your desk and it's something you use personally. But also, if it's repetitive, then each and every time you need to do that task, you're creating that list. So I have a simple real world example, not necessarily professional, but in regards, it's somewhat personal. So for travel, I travel a lot for business. I also travel personally. And I had a checklist that of all the things I had to pack. And for the longest time, I would grab a notebook, I would write it down each item, and I would check them off each time. And I realized each time I had a trip, I was writing the same list over and over again. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to I actually use a notes app on my phone, but there's also task apps you can use, but it actually has a checkbox. So when I check it, it crosses it off my list for me. And then when I have my next trip, I just uncheck them all and start all over again. It has helped tremendously with not only the time, but the stress associated to making sure I have everything when I'm packing, and especially the really important things that I could easily forget and it would be a problem. So that I've realized having that in some sort of electronic format that's also accessible to other people, like use the example, what if somebody else had to pack my suitcase tomorrow? Would they know what I need for a business trip? They could access that list and be able to do it for me. And canned responses. I feel like canned responses get a bad rap, but it depends on when you're using it. So basically that means if you get an email, you have a certain response that you could select and respond to it with that. And people think they're impersonal, and they can be if not done correctly. But if it's something as simple as somebody emails in for an inquiry, or they want to schedule a consultation, or you're confirming their appointment time, that type of stuff can be general language. It can be the same across the board. And it will ensure that it's just a click of a button instead of that staff typing out that whole email. But you make sure it's accurate and it's got all the details necessary. You know that nothing was missed. So I like canned responses quite a bit, but again, used appropriately. If it's something where your client's asking you for legal advice, you're not going to go ahead and use a canned response for that. Our third item is scattered client data. Now, your client files do contain large amounts of information, and especially for those matters that go on for a long period of time, it could be years and years of, we're talking billing, transactions, events, tasks, notes, documents, plus other things, I'm sure. And for that reason, organization's really important. We talked about in the very beginning about inefficient workflows, and I talked about disorganization. And having information all over the place is a form of disorganization, because it may be organized in its different silos. Like you might have, I'll just say from a technology perspective, let's say you have 4 different tools that you maintain in your office, and everything's organized in its own tool, but the big picture's scattered. You're not able to see everything in one place and be able to kind of connect all of the dots fairly easily. So why is that something to consider looking into in terms of breaking? And this is, I think, I have an example actually in our office, our CosmoLex office. We actually have a law firm that's around the corner from us. And one time we walked in, introduced ourselves, and we were talking, of course, about legal software. And we asked what type of setup this firm has. And he said, you're looking at it. And on the floor, there were stacks of files, stacks. And that was it. That was his method. And I know many people would say, you know what, it works for me, it's good. But if he ever were to hire a paralegal or somebody, a staff member, and they walk in, they wouldn't know where to find anything, because that system is his and his alone. He knows how it works, great, but what if somebody else has to search through these items to find something? They wouldn't know what to do. So that's one of the things, is having duplicate records especially is very time consuming. If you are maintaining a list on paper, a list in Excel, a list in a software, you're entering that piece of information 3 times. And again, it creeps in those inefficiencies, but it also produces a lot of errors. The more time you touch a piece of data, the more likelihood of there being a mistake there. And some mistakes can be really, really critical. Like you can take a trust transaction and misallocate it to the wrong matter. That's a lot more severe than, oh, I put the wrong address next to somebody's name, or I have a misspelling. If you mess up like a billing or a payment, or especially any payments received, money going out, anything financial, usually anything with a dollar, that could have a lot more serious consequences. Whenever you have multiple records, you need to have, or you should have, levels of checks and balances. That means if I am, let's say I'm a bookkeeper and I have, there's a software for the billing, there's a software for the accounting, I'm responsible to make sure that all of the payments that go into the billing software are recorded as income in the accounting software. I should not be the one to double check my work. Somebody else should be. There should be a separate set of eyes to do those checks and balances. Is it always done? No, but that's when issues creep up. If it is done the proper way, it's again very time consuming. You're having to allocate a different resource just to verifying that information. And also can produce a poor experience or poor service to your client. So if your client asks you a question about their file and you need to get back to them because you're not sure where that is or how to locate it, that affects the service your client receives. And it could be something really simple like, hey, what's my retainer balance today? Or it could be something a little bit more complicated like, hey, can I see the last 5 documents that I've shared with you? But there needs to be a way to be responsive as best as possible, and organization plays a big role in that. And collaboration, I think that this is not valued enough. Being able to share items with other team members, being able to comment on a file and say, hey, can you please review this, or share something with somebody electronically. That itself, I was actually talking with a firm today that they say they spend so much time in meetings that are essentially unnecessary because they're disorganized, because information's all over the place and they can't effectively collaborate. So they're all working on the same file, but they're not all on the same page. And that comes down to, well, can I just, go into a tool and see everything? Usually that's not the case. So how do we break this habit? Well, you're thinking, well, that's pretty straightforward. If everything's scattered, just don't have it scattered. And yes, but there's other things to think about, which is what information does cross over? Where are you duplicating information? Where do certain functions depend on each other? Where are those connections? What actually relates to a file? What doesn't? What's important to be in the place? What is in one place? What is not? And have a matter-centric system. I think that that is beyond the most important thing, because not only for organization, but for compliance, for things like trust accounting and an audit trail and a full history of billing, you need to have your system as matter-centric. Majority of legal specific tools, if not all, have a matter-centric setup, but if you're not using something legal specific, then you need to either create that type of system or look for tools that do have that, because I do think that's really important. Now, you may have a matter-centric tool, but if the staff is not properly trained with how to intake that data and enter it in that central repository, it's useless. So you do want to make sure that if you come up with a process or a tool or a setup that works really well, that there's some time spent on the training as to, okay, when a client walks in, this is what we're going to do. This is information that we need. This is how it needs to be entered. And at the very beginning, there does need to be some checks on that to say, is this being done correctly? Because misinformation or information going in the wrong places will create an even bigger mess in the long run. And it takes time. Like I said, breaking habits not easy. I think one of the biggest struggles is, oh, my staff or myself or whoever is going to have to learn something new Correct. Learn something new. I think that by enforcing it is the key part. If you truly believe that, let's say this example, if you truly believe that having a matter-centric system with all of your data centralized is going to benefit your firm, the likelihood of you enforcing it would be that much greater. And leverage integrations. A lot of people think that because they're using different technologies, they have to give up the tools that they love. I think that the tools that most people are really loyal to are things like email, calendaring, even document management, sometimes the actual document drafting tools. Those are kind of your day-to-day daily tools, like things like Office 365, for example, or Google Apps. Um, that doesn't mean you need to give them up. There's a lot of tools that integrate with those types of platforms. So that way, what's even nicer is you could have a staff member who uses Google and a staff member that uses Office 365, and they could both integrate into the same tool. So that actually helps two people on different platforms work together in a centralized tool that it's integrating with. So something to keep in mind. Doesn't mean you have to give those items up. Our fourth is related to having no measurements or goals in place. So what's important about this is ultimately you're running a business. You want it to be successful. You want to make sure that it's profitable, in addition to practicing law and being a successful, reputable lawyer. You want to make sure you have a successful business. And the decisions that you make for your business, this goes for any business, should be based off of data, not feeling. Shouldn't say, oh, I think things are going good this month, feeling good, I'm getting some clients, practice is growing, but is it? Do you actually have numbers to support that? And when you collect the right data, you may discover challenges you did not even know existed. You could have a huge collections issue, or you could realize that the time spent on billing, that's one of the items we talked about, is way too much. Or you're not getting a return on your investment for your advertising. You wouldn't even know that if you're not tracking or paying attention to it. So this is a quick list. We're not going to go through all of these. This is just a sampling of metrics. Metrics are different pieces of information that you can measure, like profitability, your overall costs, financial trends, like number 9 here, percentage of repeat or referred business. That's as simple as just collecting kind of a custom field, custom information, and being able to report on it. Can tell you a lot of information about how your business is growing, and maybe you want to put some more effort into referrals. So keeping these in mind, these are some examples for law firms. What else can be done? So first is knowing what questions need answers. Your firm may be different than another firm as to what, like, of all those metrics I pointed out, what is relevant to you. You want to collect data in a central location. So that scattered records we talked about before actually relates to this as well. If you have information in 4 or 5 different tools, the ability to analyze that and report on it becomes that much more difficult. And also if you have information, the same piece of information in 3 places, is it matching? Often it's not, and that could produce inaccurate analysis. Once you have that data, you want to seek reporting or analysis tools. I think most systems, if they collect data, they have some way to report on it. But again, you want to make sure that that fulfills your needs. And look for short and long-term trends. Don't just look at the past month. Depending on what you're measuring, it could be month over month, it could be quarter over quarter, it could be year over year, it could be a 3-year picture. You want to be able to see as many time frames as possible to spot trends and then make decisions based on those trends. And we're going to wrap up with our last item, which is related specifically to technology, actually outdated technology. So when referring to outdated technology, that just means maybe using tools that are lacking things like modern functionality. That's actually a point that I have here. It may create more IT concerns. You know, you're dealing with IT, servers, backups. That shouldn't be your focus as a lawyer. That should be somebody else. And you may have an IT person, but how are they doing things? Is it being done properly? Is that something that you're having to worry about? Are there proper disaster recovery plans in place? Often there is not. Do you know what would happen if your entire server crashed tomorrow? And that should be public knowledge, even if an IT person is handling it for you. And you lack mobility and device freedom. By mobility, we mean being able to work wherever you are. By device freedom is, well, one staff member should be able to use a Mac, and one should be able to use a PC, and one should use a phone, and one an iPad, to truly just allow them to work wherever they are, however they want to. And you could very much be missing out on modern features. Integrations that we spoke about before, different functions like client portals, online payments, even a lot of this commenting, collaborating type of functionality I'm talking about, those are in the more modern applications. And some suggestions, cloud technology, that's pretty much where the whole market is going. You do have a couple options. You could choose the hosted route, which means you take your PC environment and just make it remote so that you can access it from anywhere, or native cloud, which is like Gmail or Outlook, where you just go on a website, you log in, and your information's there. And very often they follow a SaaS model, which means software as a service. It includes the software, training, support, all of that is in one, typically subscription format. And look for mobile apps. We do everything on mobile apps as consumers today. Try to extend that to your business. Again, it's just to increase your accessibility, increase your access to your clients, and make sure that you're not chained to your desk, because that's not how a lot of us function today. Okay, so that wraps up our topic today. For those of you who are not familiar with CosmoLex, we are an all-in-one cloud practice management tool that includes everything that you see here. Of course, if you want to learn all about that, feel free to reach out. And we do have a free ebook as well. It's actually specifically on this topic that we discussed today, so you could feel free to access that at the website listed here.
That's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank our sponsor, CosmoLex, and all of you for attending our webinar today as part of the LTRC Industry Insight Series. I'd also like to thank Erica for presenting today. We will now conclude the webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Erica.